In this video, we're going to take you through how to assemble all of the component parts that we've completed from the previous videos. Nothing much to say here other than, let's get to it. We're going to turn our attention to gluing up our bridle joints first of all. Reason being is that if we were to glue up our cross-halving joint first of all, we would end up with a three-dimensional structure. And this would be very hard for us to clamp up and do further work on our joints once they have been glued. Now, as we mentioned in a previous video, it's very important that we dry fit all of our joints first to make sure that everything fits correctly. It's also pretty important that we number our joints to make sure that when we do come to put this together, we don't end up gluing the wrong thing in the wrong place. So I've already glued up parts 1 and 2, so it's now time to turn our attention to joints 3 and 4. So apply a thin layer of glue to all surfaces that are going to come into contact with your bridle joint here. You don't need too much as this should be a nice tight joint, and if we put too much on there it'll cause an awful lot of squeeze out. Also, if we have too much on there it may cause the wood to swell, and that may cause you some problems later on. So once we've got our glue on there, let's squeeze this into place, making sure that all of our joint closes up nice and neatly. Once we're happy that it is in position, we can take our G-clamp and apply a little bit of pressure. Now, any squeeze out that you do have from the joint, you can go and get yourself a wet paper towel and simply clean it up. Now that we've got these two joints taken care of, it's time to turn our attention to cleaning up the excess wood that's left over on the two that I glued up last night. So once your glue has set, you're going to be left with a little bit of excess wood on the top here and on the ends. And we're just going to take this off using our plane. Now, it's very important to consider which way we're going to run the plane, as if we ran it off the wood, what would happen is the end of the grain here would split and we'd end up with a big nasty mark left on our final joint. So we're going to run in the way, okay? Once we've got that nice and flush, we know to stop. So it's looking nice and neat just now, a little bit further to go. Very useful to make sure your plane is nice and sharp before you do this. Well, we're almost there, a couple of millimeters to go. And that's us. All done. Smooth. So we do the exact same procedure for the ends of our wood. Again, being very sure to plane in the way to the joint so that we're going in a direction in which the end grain is supported rather than coming against it and chipping our wood. Almost there now. Okay, we'll wind my blade back a bit, as I think we are pretty much bang on it now. There we go. After all that, one very sharp, precise and tidy joint. Okay, just to do the same thing for the other side. And that's us all done. Now we just need to wait for our other side to dry. We can come back and do our housing joint tomorrow. So now that our components are all glued up, it's time to mark out the final length and work out the angle for the bottom of our leg. So we're going to take our meter stick and we are going to measure out 610 millimeters. So lining this up with the very end of the wood here, using your thumb, make sure it's level, or your finger. We're going to make a little mark at 610. We'll take our tri-square and square this across. Now to do the same job on the other side. Move your work around. Line up the end of the rule with the top of your work. Let's find 610. Again, take our tri-square. Square this across. And we now have our final length of our legs. All that's left for us to do now is to join these marks together. So, taking our steel rule, lining it up with the mark on each side. There you go. I'm fairly happy with that. We can mark out the angle that's going to go on the bottom of our legs. And that should keep things nice and flat against the floor when we put this upright. And this is another reason why we kept our parts separate rather than joining our cross-halving joint when we were joining our bridle joints, is that it's much easier for us to clamp up this work when it's in two halves and flat. If this was a 3D structure, it'd be very hard for me to orientate this around the bench in such a way that I could hold it in a way that's easy for me to get into places. But all we have to do at this point is simply trim off the excess piece of wood at the bottom here. Okay. We're going to take our tenon saw and just get to it. Now, as we have done previously, I'm trying to cut to the waist side of the wood. I'm also using my thumb as a bit of a steady just to get things started. And I'm going to try and follow my lines on each side of the cut to give me some guides before I just go for this. So now I've got a guide on the top and the side. I'm going to turn my attention to the back end now. It looks like we're following the line fairly straight. Yep, that's pretty good. So let's just cut this off. Job done. Let's do the other side. So we want to apply a small amount of glue to all the internal faces here. Try not to overdo it, as it will cause the wood to swell and make it much harder for you to put this joint together. Now, this was already quite a tough joint when we put it together dry fitting, so I expect it to give me a little bit of resistance here. So let's try and squeeze this together as best we can by hand. But we do have clamp on standby just to give us a little bit of assistance. There we go. So, nicely closed up. Very, very, very tight joint there. So when that glue's dry, that'll be absolutely solid as a rock. So once our cross-halving joint has dried, what we need to now do is find the centre of this section here. The easiest way for us to do this is to take a steel rule and draw a line from corner to corner. And where these lines overlap is exactly the centre of that square section there. And there's our centre point right there. So now that we have our centre point, we're going to take a drill and we're going to make a little pilot's hole. Okay, so you're going to need a 2mm or a 2.5mm drill bit to make your pilot hole. And this is so that our screw that's going to hold our seat on top here is going to go into the wood nicely without splitting anything. Let's get this going. There we go, just take that out. So that should be more than enough of a pilot hole now. And that, like I said earlier, is just going to ensure that our screw doesn't split the wood when we drive it in later. Now, in order to find the centre of our circle, things are a little bit more tricky. If you did do this with a pair of compasses, you should already have a centre mark there, so job done. In our case, we have a join running straight through the middle of this. Now I've measured from side to side, and this sits exactly on 135mm, which is half of the 270 that we marked out earlier. So all we need to do is measure along this line. If we can find the join. Mark at 135, because that is our halfway point. And that will be as good as makes no difference, the middle. So now that we have our centre mark, what we're going to do this time is we're going to drill a clearance hole. That is a hole that's big enough for the screw to drop straight through without biting at all. I have a little bit of scrap wood underneath this so that when I go through I don't damage my workbench. Also the wood will be supported from the back, avoiding any blowout on the far side. So once again, let's take our drill, place it on our mark, and let's just get going. That'll be us through. So you drill out. And as you can see, no tear out or blowout on the back side because I had that scrap bit of wood there. Next thing we're going to need to do is countersink this. So taking your countersink, annoyingly my one doesn't quite fit into my hand drill, we can simply run this, give it a little twist on top of our hole there. And this is going to make a little indentation in the top surface of the wood so that when we put our screw in, the screw head will sit below the level of the surface. You can see we're starting to get that little indentation there. A little bit more and then we'll be ready to put this final part together. Now we're very much in the final stages of this build here. All that's left to do is attach our seat to the top of our stool using a screw. We can pop the screw through the clearance hole that we made earlier, line that up with our pilot hole. There we go. And now when we come to screw this together, this should give us a little bit less resistance when we're doing this by hand, and also guide the screw nice and straight without splitting the woods. And there you have it. Our work here is done. So there you have it, one completed bar stool made entirely from scrap wood. All that's really left to do is to give this a good sand down and finish this whichever way we see fit, be that varnish, wax, oil, or, as my daughter has decided, paint. We already have a lilac one, it's time to make a purple one to go with it. And as you can see, they stack together nicely like so.